Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe and never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Nancy Lulfs, where she shares her life story about how there was a time where she knew about Jesus but didn't know him personally. But when she did come to know him personally, it changed her life. And looking back, she can see how God connected the dots throughout her life. And some of those dots she didn't even know were there in the first place. So let's get into the conversation with Nancy. Nancy, thank you for taking time to be a guest on our podcast today. We appreciate you taking your time to share your story and point to Jesus in your life. So thank you for being here. As we begin, can you share a little bit about your life growing up, your setting, maybe siblings, any church history and background?
Okay, well, if I go with the church background, it's way back. I was baptized as a child, a baby, Methodist. Mm-hmm. We lived with my grandmother for several years. Grandma was Baptist, so I went to Baptist Sunday school. And then when my folks got a house of their own and we moved, the girl up the road was going to the Lutheran church, was just a close walk from there, and I started going to Sunday school with her. So I was confirmed Lutheran and married Lutheran, and then after I got married, kind of got away from church and for several years, and then when I finally started, I decided, I got to do something about this. And I started taking the kids to the Lutheran church because that's what I knew. Mm-hmm. And it was just up the road. And they were all confirmed Lutheran. Well, the three older ones were. The youngest one wasn't. I don't know, a girl that I worked with, her brother had gotten saved at a church up in Temperance, Michigan. And of course, he was telling her all about. So then she got a hold of me because we were pretty close. So then I ended up going to Bible study with her. Then I went to church with her, and that's how I gave my heart to the Lord up there, and it was a full gospel church.
So about how old were you when you basically essentially became serious about Jesus?
Almost 40.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to hear your story. There's Methodist, Baptist, and Lutheran background in there. You were exposed to who Jesus was, but you didn't really know him personally.
Right.
And that's a big distinction that's really important to make sure we make. Because there's a lot of people who might attend church, even on a regular basis, that know about Jesus, but don't actually know him on a personal level. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be careful that we don't take that for granted.
Oh, yeah. It was just so different when, because Lutheran Church doesn't teach anything about I had never heard of being born again. I thought, what are you talking about? And when I started going to this other church and the Bible study, it was like, wow. And when I finally gave myself to that is a day I will never, I could tell you what I was wearing that day.
Well, share details about it. And the reason I ask is because it's when we can remember our spiritual moments, it can help us when we're going through difficult times, draw back on those memories. Yeah.
Well, Pastor was getting ready to preach, and the one of the elders who was in charge of our Bible study, the one that I was going to, he was talking, and he led the music, and he said, and I feel like there's someone here that wants to give their heart to the Lord. Well, this was early in the service, before the sermon. And Rose looked at me and she says, I'll go with you if you want to go. So I went up and kneeled on the stairs, and I felt like the whole world was taken off my shoulder. It was such a relief. I don't even know how to describe it. That's all I can feel. Like I just felt the weight of the world is gone. What a difference in my life. I just was amazed, and been there ever since.
Are there specific ways that you remember how your life changed after that moment?
Well, for me, they did, because then I was in prayer and I was reading my Bible, which I hadn't very rarely done before that. Some, but not very often, a couple of years, well, probably a year or so after that, John started going to Bible study with me, and then he had cancer when he was in the hospital. One of the elders went up and he gave his heart to the Lord then. So it was about 5 years, I think, before he passed, and things were, well, they seemed to calm down a whole lot, you know. It just made a difference. The kids were all gone by then, you know. Well, the youngest one, John's son, we only had one. I had 3 from the first marriage, 1 with the second, and David had enlisted in the army, and so when John died, he happened to be home on boot leave. He was just 18, so that was kind of tough. But I got the other kids to school and to catechism and, you know, Sunday school and that at the Lutheran church, and I was doing that before I really became saved. And by that time the 3 older ones were all gone, married, you know, and so it was.
Yeah, so let's come back to that in a minute. Can you share a little bit about your professional journey, the different types of jobs you've had?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, let's see. I worked as a waitress. I worked at a country club one summer, and I worked at Don's Drive-In, which is basically like a Burger King, McDonald's, something like that. But they also had what do you call it? Can't even remember now. The lot they can order from their car. And
oh, okay.
Yeah. That's been a long time ago. I did that. I've done cleaning. I worked for a cleaning company and did offices, and I've done some house cleaning and all that kind of stuff. And then I went to Bargain City, which is like they own Big Lots, so it's that kind of a store. And I worked there for 9.5 years, and then I left there, and because my brother came over, and he said he was into the muzzle loaders, and he says, I'm going to rendezvous out west, do you want to go along? John says, well, go ahead and go if you want to. I can't go, but you go to have a good time. Well, we were gone for a month. We had more fun. It was great. Teepees, costumes, and the whole everything. It was a good time. So then I worked at a Japanese restaurant as cleaning, and from there I went to Bargain City. And from Bargain City, I went to work at Medical College Hospital, and I worked there for 15 years when I retired.
What'd you do there?
I worked in the diet office.
Okay.
I was a clerk, but I learned a lot while I was there, which was really helpful. You know, but
of the various types of jobs that you've had, what one was your favorite?
Oh, that's hard because I enjoyed the work at Bargain City, but I liked working at the hospital too. You know, it was nice. I met a lot of nice people, and you know.
Yeah. No, I was just curious about that. You have a very broad experience from office work to retail to cleaning to restaurants. So very varied experiences there. So thank you for sharing that a little bit. And as you think about your life, there was a significant period where you were a single parent, and of little kids particularly. Can you share with us what that was like?
Well, it was different. It was a little difficult because Vicky was so little. I mean, we lived with my folks. Fortunately, they had enough room in their house that we could stay there, and we lived there for probably about a year. And then I went to New York City to spend the summer with my girlfriend, the kids and I. She had 2 kids, and while I was there, that's where I met John. It happened that he was her babysitter because her husband was in the Coast Guards, and Bill was off towards Alaska on a cruise, you know, with his Coast Guard people. And so that's where I met John. But I spent 3 months there, and I worked at a restaurant there. And so he ended up watching all the kids because I worked night shift. And but as I said, that's where I met him, and came back home, and he came out to visit at Christmas time. And then in the summer when school was out, Nan was home to visit. Her family was from Ohio too, and so we loaded up a trailer, and we went back to New York, and John and I got married, and we lived with his mom for, oh gosh, almost a year. And my folks were out to visit. And Dad says, when are you going to come home where you belong? And he says, keep saying that, I'm going to take you up on it one of these days. And in September, we came back to Ohio in time for Lisa to go back to school, you know. And we lived with them for about 9 months until we found a house. And so that was, I've done a lot of traveling in my life, moved a lot.
And now you live in Iowa.
And now I'm in Iowa. It's like, oh my goodness, I wanted to live in Arizona, but John says, you got me this far, you're not getting me any further. He was a city boy, you know.
Now, I think, did you mention that as the kids were growing up, you had them in catechism and those types of things, but would you say, was your household super invested in Jesus at that moment?
No, not at all.
And so it was your friend's child who came to know Jesus, and that's kind of how you got drawn into Jesus, correct?
Yeah, Rose was, well, I worked with her at Bargain City. And we had to be careful because my name was Buckley and hers was Buckler. So we always had watch when you grab the time card, you don't grab the wrong one, you know. So we worked together for quite a while. Yeah.
and through her you got involved in the group, the Sunday school, the church, and gave your life to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because it showed how your priorities began to change after Jesus. Talking about you reading your Bible and praying, and while those can seem as small things, they make a big difference.
Oh, they're so important. You just don't realize until you get involved in it, you know. And sometimes I think so many times, you know, okay, we belong to the church, you know, we love the Lord and so on and so forth, but how often do we read the Bible and spend time talking to Him? And that's something I think you grow in. I know I have, and since I've been out here, I've gotten even closer. But then I don't have family that I have to be concerned about, you know.
Do you have a set time that you try to spend with Jesus?
First thing in the morning. Several years ago, I was, after I had married Richard, and I was back in the office having my prayer time, and he told me to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I am not a morning person, but I've been getting up between 6 and 6:30 almost every day ever since, which that's him. If the Lord didn't nudge me out of bed, I probably wouldn't get up. And I spend my time with him in prayer, and I read a little bit of the Word, and then later on in the day I'll read some more, because I tend to remember better later in the day when I don't have my mind going with I need to do this and this and this, you know. So that seems to make a bit of a difference too.
Personally, I'm with you on doing it first thing, but the issue is not that you do it this way or that way, but that you spend time with Jesus,
right,
and you spend focused time with Jesus.
Right.
Now, as you look back on your life, you've referenced John and Richard, two men that you were married to. John first and then Richard, but both men passed away.
Yeah.
And can you share kind of how you got through their passings and what role, if any, faith played in that?
Oh, a lot. I couldn't have made it without God. I really couldn't. And I tell him that almost every day. I can't get along without you for 1 second of any day. When John passed, it's like I was still working. I was working at the hospital then. It's like, now what am I going to do now? You know, I had no idea what I was going to do, if I was going to anything, nothing. It just, my mind was just a scattered mess. And the Lord gave me Psalm 121, and I read that every day. So that helped a lot. If I didn't have Jesus, I'd have probably been up the creek, but it was good. It was really good. And then being that the kids were all gone, because David was in the army, he was gone, you know, and he was the youngest. But John helped me to raise the kids, and we were married for 25 years when he passed. But as I said, if I hadn't known the Lord, I would have really had a hard time. It worked out really, really well. And then, of course, I had some Christian friends that I worked with, and that helped a lot. And Rose, of course, was still in my. She was always there. It's nice to have a friend like that. That plus my girlfriend the one that I visited in New York with the kids. She was like a sister. I was 9 months older than her, and that's how long we'd known each other. So we were really close. We dated together in high school, and it was nice to have her around too. And then she passed away just before I retired, and we had so many plans, things that we wanted to do because we were both alone, and that was hard. It took a while to get over that one, but it was still good. A lot of good memories, and then I retired. Hallelujah. I was more than ready. Things were changing at work, and I said, I'm old enough to retire. I can retire now, and I think I will because things are changing so much. I don't want to be all worn out before I retire and not be able to do anything when I do. And so when I did retire, then I ended up spending my winters in Arizona with one of my brothers and his family. That was really nice. I liked that. And then, so I made some good friends at church out there, and he had given his life to the Lord too, several years before, which was wonderful. And so I was out there probably 7 or 8 years in a row, and then I came home one spring, and I ended up marrying Richard. It's like, and I told him I was getting married. In fact, one of the girls out there, I told her, she says, I almost fell out of bed when you called.
So how did you meet Richard?
Oh, they were good. He and his wife were good friends of my oldest, Lisa. And so I met him at the house. They'd been there for graduations and New Year's and, all that kind of stuff. So I'd known him for 5 or 6 years. And then Shirley passed. I was gone. And, well, that's how I met him. And we always, the thing about it, Lisa and Shirley, and they would sit over in the corner talking recipes and all that kind of stuff. Richard and I sat over on the other side of the room talking about traveling and about the Bible. So, we had some time together. He was a good Christian, or otherwise I wouldn't have married him. I had been a widow for 21 years when I married Richard. And that was a big change. Mm-hmm. That first year was, the relationship was good, but the adjustment was terrible. But he was a wonderful man, wonderful and loving, and how many times he would say, I love you, but God first, which touched my heart. I just thought that was really neat. He told me that a lot.
And now you and Richard, you're married, you had a nice home and property there, but after he passed, you had to make some changes in your life setting.
Right.
And which eventually brought you here to Iowa. Mm-hmm. And so it was difficult going 21 years as by yourself to then living with someone and all the extra things that go in with that.
Keeping a house and feeding somebody, and with his health, fortunately what I had learned when I worked at the hospital helped me to be able to help him with his health. And he lived, he died 2 weeks before our 12th anniversary. So it was, but I had known him for, several years. In fact, all the kids knew him. They would go over to the house, so they knew him and his wife, and the whole. And my first husband, my ex, that's when I found out about Gene. That Richard knew him. He had just lived up the road for several years, and all the kids learned how to swim in the pond. That was a shock, because Richard had built a log cabin out back, and Gene and his second wife, there were pictures of them hanging in the cabin where they were cleaning and helping with the cabin, the caulking and all that kind of stuff. That was a surprise. That really was a big surprise. And so it was, but they'd been good friends for quite a while. But it was kind of nice, really.
Yeah, well, so as you think of your life, and particularly how God put specific people in your life, are there ways that you can look back and see how God connected the dots? Maybe even the dots that you didn't even know were there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. It's just shocking. When you stop and think about all the things that have gone on in your past life, all the different places that I've been, that I've lived, people that I've known, and all my kids knew Richard. And of course, Gene just lived up the road from him, so that's how they met him. And that had been quite a few years before, a long time before, in fact. And then I'm talking to Richard and got to thinking about it. And we both went to the same high school, the same year, and never knew each other. And when we were in 7th, 8th grade, they had a place they called Teen Town, and they had dances on Friday and Saturday nights. We both went to those. I said he was one of the boys that sat on the window ledge watching because he didn't dance. I never knew him. It just all these kind of things. And the weird thing, strange things, whatever you want to call it, we were going through papers and stuff one day, and Shirley's birth certificate was there, and Shirley and Richard and I were all delivered by the same doctor. Oh. That was a shock.
Yeah.
So it's such a small world that we live in. We have no idea. And God knew all this before I ever was born. It just always amazes me anyway.
Well, I bring that up just because it's fun how you met John, and then it's in New York, and it's fun how you already had a family connection with Richard, and how God really just connected the dots with that, and it's really hard to see that type of stuff as you're going through life, but when you look back, you can see how God was working and preparing you, and
yes.
So I just bring that up just to point to how God knew what He was doing.
Absolutely. And John had an aunt and uncle that lived in Toledo, so it's like, oh my goodness.
So as we close here today, I just wanted to know is there anything that's giving you hope, anything that's just bringing you encouragement with Jesus right now?
Oh golly, just reading His Word and listening to Christian programming and church, of course. That's a given, And I feel so much closer to the Lord now than I did before. It's been a gradual growth. It really has. And since Richard passed and I moved out here, I've gotten even closer to him, and I really like that. It's encouraging. It's strengthening. And I know that when I have my off days, I know that He forgives me and helps me to get through them. So it's been a real blessing.
Well, good. You mentioned it's been a gradual growth, but I do want to highlight the growth is never done.
Right.
We always have more, and so you've been on this journey for decades now, but I want to make sure if people didn't catch at the beginning that you knew about Jesus, but it wasn't until you knew Him personally that it changed your life. Right. So we can know the stats, we can know a few tidbits or facts about Him, but until Jesus comes and actually changes your life, that's when we find meaning in who Jesus is.
Oh yes.
That's when it's no longer just a religion. It's something deeper than that.
If you're close, I think if you're close to your siblings, and my brothers and I were very close, especially the first. Well, I'm the big sister, so Norman and I were really, really close. And knowing the closeness with my brothers and the feeling that I had from them, that you feel even closer to Jesus, and it's just like your big brother, which I never had. I know that He's always there, and I can always go to Him, and it's been such a blessing. So many, many times, if I have trouble, problems, whatever, I talk to Him, and the majority of the time they clear up pretty quick. It
Well,
helps.
well, good. Thank you for sharing. I do like to make sure that each guest has an opportunity to answer a very open-ended question at the end. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything you felt we missed or that you just wanted to share?
Golly, just don't ever give up. Hang on to Jesus and don't ever give up. I mean, I know there are moments in our life when it's like, well, whatever, you know. But if you turn to the Lord and trust Him, and I think that's the biggest thing, to trust Him knowing that He's always with you, no matter what you're going through, and stay close to Him and remember that always.
That's good. Thank you for sharing today, for sharing your story, and just pointing to Jesus throughout your life and how He has provided and been there for you. So thank you for being a guest on our show today.
It's been my honor. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life, and please subscribe to never miss an episode.